bring Nancy to all of you this evening. We just want to welcome everyone tonight to Indiana Adoptee Network's Adoption Happy Hour. We're here every Friday night at 7 p.m. If you're joining us for the first time, or even if you're not, give us a shout out in the chat bar. Let us know where you're calling from. We always like to know where everyone's calling in from. I'm your host, Marcie Keithley, and we have Jennifer Falsing and Pam Dixon-Krosky also in the Zoom room helping us out this evening. So with, I believe Nancy doesn't need any introduction. She will be speaking tonight about her second book, Coming Home to Self. And she is also the author of The Primal Wound. So Nancy, I'm going to let you go ahead and kick it off. We will again, hold your questions until Nancy's finished her presentation. That is the recording portion. And when we open it up to Q&A, we will stop the recording.
Okay, so I'm just going to be talking on my phone. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And I don't see anybody. I don't see anything. Okay, I wanted to talk a little bit about my second book, but I need to go back a little bit to start with, because one of the things that I want everybody to know is that you have the person who is you, the self, the essence of you, who's been there ever since the day you were born. And then you have all kinds of things that have happened to you. And the one important thing that is most disconcerting for all of you adoptees is being separated from your first mother. And that is what we call the primal wound. So what happens then, you have all kinds of manifestations as a result of that. One of them is hyperarousal, and that's part of the fight or flight, or being paralyzed in place, you know, those kinds of things. Then there are beliefs that come up, all kinds of beliefs that will form about yourself, what we call the baby beliefs. They come up during a time when you really don't have conscious memory. So you will be stuck with these beliefs and not know why you have them or where they came from. The other thing is anxiety and depression. Those two things come along with having been separated from your mother, and part of that is a result of sadness, the sorrow of the loss of your mother, and the anxiety of having things happen to you. In other words, that anxiety kind of hangs around your whole life for the most part. The consequences are hypervigilance, where you really always have to be watching out to see if anything's going to happen. PTSD, which means that you keep getting from certain little vague suggestions of something that happened to you before, you will get some kind of hypervigilance, PTSD, repetition, compulsion, and dissociation. Dissociation is when you kind of drift off into some other space and you're not really in the present. That happens quite a bit. Then you have disconnection, and that means difficulty with relationships, not being able to connect completely because of the fear of having someone leave you. Your sense of yourself, the value of yourself, is changed or becomes more vague and oftentimes critical. You're critical of yourself. And then there's the continuity of life, which sometimes seems very strange and as if maybe there isn't any, or it gets confusing, like continuity of life. And then another thing is cause and effect. One of the things that happens in this whole thing, this trauma of separation from the mother, is the idea of cause and effect. In other words, it isn't always easy when you do something to know what the effect is going to be. And it's very important to get that. So that's part of what we're going to be talking about today. Now, the other thing that the other manifestation is what we call captivity. And that is when a person feels as if they're being kept captive. They know they belong in their family, but they don't quite, they think there must be somewhere where else they need to be. And they're being kept there somehow. And at the other side of that is they're afraid that maybe they will be left and they won't have that home again. So these are all things that come up from what we talked about in the past in Coming Home to Self or in Primal Wound, with all those issues of abandonment and loss and rejection, trust, intimacy issues, loyalty and identity issues, guilt and shame, power and control. These are all issues that you've been dealing with all your life. So now, The Primal Wound was a very popular book because it helped people find words for how they were experiencing adoption. Now, Coming Home to Self is the answer to the question. Well, people would say, well, now I know why I feel the way I feel and why I behave the way I behave, but what am I supposed to do about it? So that's why I wrote Coming Home to Self. Now, Coming Home to Self means that you are going to be involved in your own process. In other words, what happened to you, the trauma that happened to you was not your fault at all. It happened to you and you didn't have anything to do with it, even those of you who think it must have been something I did. No, it wasn't anything you did. You were a perfect little baby and things started happening to you. But as an adult, you will be responsible for your own healing because as adults, that's what we have to do. And so you have to take a good, honest look at yourself as you go through different parts of your adult life. And one of the most important things, and this is one of the things that's very hard for people to do, because one of the things that happens when you're taken away from your original mother and placed with somebody else is that all little babies, now, we're mammals like all the other mammals, and all mammals know their own mothers because they know through their senses, hearing, sight, sound, all of those senses, her energy, her resonance, all of those things. When you're placed with somebody else, that just doesn't feel quite right. And so instead of feeling some kind of happiness or safety around that new mother, there's a feeling of, where is mom? Where are all those senses and all that rhythm and resonance that I felt? So sometimes one of the things that it's very important for mothers to do, it's very early in the life of a child, is to be in tune with that baby. And mothers who give birth to their babies are in tune with that. And mothers that are adopted mothers don't have that same hormone. So she can't really know quite as well what to do. Now, one of the things that is important to know about the neurology, you see, at the time that you're born, you have 100 billion cells, neurological cells that need to be connected. And a lot of those get connected very early in the first 3 years. But they're also influenced by the experience you're having. So it's not just you, the person you are, that gets all these connections. It's also what's been happening to you. And the problem with this is that you have what's called, at this time, between the ages of birth and 3 years old, let's say, you have what's called implicit memory. Now that means that that's not conscious memory. You will remember through your senses, you remember through your cells, and you remember through certain things in your body, but you won't remember with your mind. You won't remember it you won't remember coming through the birth canal. You won't remember your mother having left you. You won't remember those things. So this is what's very difficult, because the reason I wrote Primal Wound was because all those things were a mystery to a lot of adoptees. What's going on? Why I don't remember whatever it is that's making me respond the way I'm responding with my feelings and my behavior. So about age 3, you start getting what's called explicit memory or conscious memory. And then you can start remembering the things that are happening to you and the things that are important for you to remember about certain things, like learning things like what's the capital of your state and things like that. And also the things that you can remember, like going on a picnic with mom and dad. So keep those two things in mind, implicit memory and explicit memory, because those things are going to come in handy to know about later on. Now, we also have the two systems, the limbic system and the neurocortex. The limbic system is the part that keeps all of your feelings and so forth, and a lot of those implicit memories. Your neocortex is the things that make you think and remember things and learn things. Now, another part of the whole thing, this is, I know I'm going through the things that happened in your childhood, but this is leading up to the things that you have to deal with as adults. And one of them is the nature versus nurture thing. We used to always argue about that. Is it more important the nurture part of you or the nature part of you? And the more I have worked with adoptees, as far as knowing who you are, I really think the nature part has more to do with it. Because I've seen so many people, and some of you who've been in reunion and have met your biological family, and all of a sudden you feel, oh yeah, I know things about these people. I just know them, and they know things about me. I don't even have to say some of these things. That's because what we call the mirroring of the genetic code. And all of you growing up in your adoptive families, and you may have had some trouble understanding what your parents wanted from you, or you, especially during the teenage years, when you're going through the identity crisis, you're trying to figure out what's you and what you should be doing when you should be fitting into the family, and you don't feel as if you fit in the family very well. And so many people try so hard to fit into the family, and the more we know about DNA, the more we realize that you're not going to really entirely fit into that family the way you would fit into your biological family. And so those of you who wonder why you had problems with your mom, your adoptive mom, during your teenage years, some of it had to do with that, with just the differences in your personalities, the differences in the way you communicate, the differences in your sense of humor, or your talents, or your interests, and all of those kinds of things. Now, the things that are easy to tell are the color of your hair and the color of your eyes, okay, and whether you're tall or short or that kind of thing. But there are so many parts of you, so many things that are so important to who you are that are not reflected in your adoptive family. And all of you have been missing out on that. And having missed out on that, then you start thinking, well, what's wrong with me? Why can't I really fit into this family? Or what? And some of you will fit in better than others because they'll be a better fit. But that's not the same as having that reflected back to you. So when you are trying to figure out what you're supposed to do as an adult, you know that you have feelings, and those feelings create behaviors. And as an adult, you can't just react to those feelings. You have to step back and think about how you want to respond to the feelings. Now, the main feelings are fear, anger and rage, guilt and shame, sorrow, and joy. All of those are feelings. If you say, I feel that, you're going to be telling something that you're thinking, not your feeling. Excuse me, my voice is getting worse and worse. Are you hearing me okay? Can anybody tell me that? Because my voice is getting hoarse.
Yep, we can hear you just fine.
Yeah, we can hear you fine, Nancy.
Oh, okay. All right. So you have feelings and you have thoughts. Now, some of the newer therapies are thinking that our thoughts are our worst enemies, because how many of you get into a thought spiral and you think and you think and you assume and you assume and you presume and you presume and you go all through all these different thoughts and drive yourself kind of crazy and drive everybody else crazy too, because they don't know what the heck's going on. So your thoughts are stories that you make up in your head a lot of the time. Stories that you make up in your head to try to answer questions that you have about your life, and you don't know the answers, so you make them up. And a lot of you make up stories like, I'm not good enough, or I'm not lovable, or I don't have an impact on anybody, and that kind of thing. And those are all just thoughts that go through your head. They have nothing to do with reality, although it feels like your reality. So when I say your mind might be your enemy, that's what I'm talking about. When you obsess with things and you go over and over things and you think you know what you're talking about to yourself, but maybe not. So, and then you have beliefs, and these beliefs are coming from when you were a little tiny baby and you had to figure something out, although it wasn't really figuring out, it was just some kind of belief popping up. And as I say, some of those beliefs have to do with when you were going through the time when all your synapses were connecting, and so those beliefs were imprinted as a result of a lot of your experience. So your experience was very puzzling to you during those first 3 years, because you couldn't quite figure out what was going on, because you didn't have that mirroring of your mom or your dad to be able to know who you are. So some of those beliefs are, as I said, unworthy, unlovable, a burden, a savior, a replacement, having no impact on anyone, all of these kinds of things. And I just want you to know that you need to really challenge all those beliefs, because they aren't really true. And if you ask any of your friends, they'll tell you they aren't true. And if they ask you, you have to tell them too, because you will know that it's not true about them, and so you have to consider at least the idea that it's not true about you. Now, one of the things that I'd like to also talk to you about, I have an article on my website called Identity and Relationships. And that has to do with all that business of not having your genetic code reflected back at you, and how hard it is. And it's hard for your parents too, because they don't have that. I have one adopted child and one biological child, and I love them both to death. I just love them both, and we have a wonderful relationship. But I can tell you that I can understand, and especially during the childhood, I could understand my biological daughter easier than I could understand my adopted daughter, because I could see myself in her. I could see her in me. And that makes a big difference, because you can read things into people's body language, facial expressions, all of those kinds of things that are familiar to you. So, so one of the things then is what we call the coping self. Now, the coping self is what I wrote about in Primal Wound. Primal Wound is all about coping. I've had so many people email me, hundreds and hundreds of people emailing me, telling me that I know them better than anybody knows them. But that's not true. I don't know you, the person you are, the personality you are, who you are. What I know, or what I have an idea about, has to do with how you coped with the loss of your first mother and living with genetical strangers. So that's what Primal Wound was all about. The whole thing was about coping mechanisms. So now I wrote another chapter in another article on my website called The Three Faces of Adoptees. You can tell how old I am because that comes from a movie, The Three Faces of Eve. Some of you will remember that. Not any of you adoptees, probably. And that talks about the coping self, the adaptive self. The adaptive self is the person that you're trying to be to fit into your family. You're just trying to fit into that family, and you're doing the coping things, which people don't always understand either, and you're trying to adapt to the family, and then you have your authentic self. Now, the one that gets kind of shoved down to the bottom of this whole onion thing is the authentic self, because remember, when you have some beliefs about yourself that you don't think maybe that authentic self is what you want people to know about. So, so the coping self, all those things we talked about with trust and control, that's a big one. So how do you know? How do you know it's really you? What are the things that you need to find out about yourself? Now, some of you can say, oh, I know myself really well. And and some of you probably do. You probably have been noticing things that you like and dislike or don't care about. You notice what things you're drawn to and what things and what things that make you upset and what things don't. But the main thing is for you to know and to you to be sure that you are honest with yourself about those things, because one of the things that many adoptees do after they get through adapting to their adoptive family is they start adapting to everybody else. You call that the chameleon. You're just really good at adapting, right? And so you get into a group of people, and pretty soon you're just feeling like one of them. But the only problem is that you're kind of losing yourself in that whole thing. And so one of the things I want you to do when we're talking about coming home to self, coming home to who you really are, that essence, that person you were when you were born and had all the potential to be who you are, and did not have to adapt, did not have to cope, but just became yourself. Now, of course, everybody has to adapt and cope to a certain extent, but nobody has to do that as much as you adoptees do, because you're in an entirely different family. The only people that are worse off are foster kids. I mean, not only do they have to start adapting to a family, but then they get put into a different family, and they don't know what that family expects of them, and they don't know how to act in that family, and so then they're put into another family. I mean, that is just crazy. It's just crazy. So at least those of you who were adopted are the ones who, at least you had some kind of consistency in that person you were supposed to, or those people you were supposed to adapt to. But at the same time that you're adapting, though, one of the things that I've noticed as I worked with adoptees for over 30 years has to do with how different so many of you adoptees are from your adoptive parents. Now, it used to be nature versus nurture. Well, if you live with a person from the time you're born until you're, 35 or something, then you probably should be pretty much like that family. But, if you really dig down deep into who you are, your personality, who you want to be, what have you given up in order to be someone maybe that you thought your family wanted you to be? And maybe they didn't even want you to be that. Maybe that's just what you decided. So I want you to start thinking about, who am I? If you go into your friend's house, look around the room, see what furniture you like and what you don't like. Look at the pictures on the walls. Do you like some of those and not like some of those? What colors do you like? You really have to ask yourself all these questions. And and some things you just won't care, and that's okay too. There are a lot of things that doesn't make any difference. If you have a really strong feeling reaction to something, then that probably has more to do with something to do with you. So remember that too. But you need to stop being a people pleaser, and on the other hand, stop rebelling and doing what everybody doesn't want you to do. and stop trying to control everybody else, and just remember to control yourself. That's a good thing to do. Now, one of the things that I want to go into too here is the difference between the difference between how you feel about how people affect you and how you feel about how you affect other people. Because one of the things I've noticed, and one of the people that I saw many years ago told me, he said the most important thing you ever told me was that I have an impact on people. Because he was a musician, or he is a musician, and he knew that people loved his music, but he didn't figure that anybody really, if they really knew him, that they wouldn't like him. And so he, one of the things, and so he said it, he knew that he put people off. He'd do things, he'd say things, and it didn't seem to matter to him what he did and said, because he didn't think it mattered at all, that he mattered at all. If you're not important, what difference does it make what you do, right? But it does make a difference, because all of these people that you are doing these things to are people that you care about. I mean, you don't have as much trouble with people you don't care about. You do better with those people, actually. But when it's somebody you really care about and you don't think you have an impact on them, you really have to do, here's how you find out. You check on them, see how they're reacting to what you just did or just said. Now, I know that sometimes, and this is true in adoptive families, sometimes the parents, for instance, don't really react to what they really feel about what their child is doing or saying. And that's because they don't want to become intimidated by the child who gets, especially acting out kids, who they get really upset and they scream and they yell and they do things. So in order not to upset them, here's an example I give in one of my books. A teenage girl was arguing with her mother and got mad at her, called her a black blankety blank, ran up the stairs and slammed the door to her room. Now her mother was feeling pretty bad because she didn't like the name her daughter called her. So about 5 minutes later, the girl came back and she was coming down the stairs and she said, "Mom, can you take me over to George's house?" Just like that. Now the mom was still feeling a little bit dizzy from what her daughter had just said to her, but she didn't want any more of that noise from her daughter, so she said, "Sure, get your coat and we'll go." Okay, so how is somebody supposed to know they make an impact if somebody just covers it up like that? Doesn't say, "Hey, sweetheart, I don't appreciate what you called me a while ago, and I think that I'm not going to take you over to George's house right now. I just don't feel like doing that." So it takes people saying, "Hey, wait a minute. I don't like what you said to me. I don't like what you just did," in order for them to realize they have an impact. And sometimes, as I say, with the ones that act out and yell and get angry, they get away with it. They get away with it because the people they're with don't want them. In other words, you've heard of walking around on eggshells. A lot of people walk around on eggshells when they're with adoptees. And I don't think anybody wants to do this, but I think there's this, as I said, the belief system puts you in a place where you really have to take into consideration that you may have an impact. And as I say, the way you tell if you have an impact is that you really, really notice how whatever you did or said makes them feel. You notice them, you notice. And then you need to say, "Wait a minute, what did I do? What did I just say? I notice that you're reacting to it." Because that's the way you're going to learn. And it's very important, by the way. So many relationships, really important relationships, are thrown by the wayside because of this kind of thing. Just getting tired. I'm coming home to self on some page back there, 340 or something like that. There's a conversation I had with a person who had that happen. And her boyfriend was doing all kinds of things to her, And she finally just got tired of it. She put up with it for a long time, but she finally said, I just think he thinks I'm the mother that's going to leave him. And I'm going to leave him because I'm so tired of the way he's treating me. So you have to be cognizant of how you affect other people. Okay, what are some other things? I want to leave time for questions, and I'm going to have to figure out how we're going to do that. I'm real sorry about this whole thing with my computer. I'm not sure if it's me or my computer. But anyway, I mean, I don't usually have trouble with Zoom, but this just didn't work out. And
Nancy.
So anyway.
Nancy, I'm going to interrupt
Yeah.
just a second. Yeah, you're doing fine. We are going to wrap it up here so we can allow some of those questions. Some of the adoptees have even sent in questions early. So I'll let you go ahead and wind down. And again, don't worry about it. I mean, technology happens. We're just glad to have you.
Okay, well, I'll just mention a few things.
Sure, go
a few
right
things
ahead.
Here. Okay, so just think about, what are your favorite things? You have to be honest with yourself. What are your favorite food, clothing, color, music, movies, books, TV, flowers, trees, a peaceful place to be? All of those things. What do you really think? What are your thoughts about that? What do you like? What do you like? And what do you not care about? And what do you not like? And then think about the qualities you admire in a person: a friend, a work partner, a teacher, a life partner, the president. What is it you admire about a person? And what is it you don't like about a person? Okay. Then one of the things I'd say, think about the changes you'd like to make in your life. And how would you go about doing that? Because it has to be like a step-by-step process. And you don't have to worry about whether anybody else will recognize you when you do it. They probably will be very happy for you. Okay, so is it time for me to stop?
Let's see. Yeah, we were going to stop around 8. It's almost 8 o'clock. Do you have a final comment before we open it up?
Well, let me say 3 things here. There's a paradox that you need to know about, and that is the paradox of strength and vulnerability. You can't be strong unless you can also be vulnerable. And that's very important to know, because vulnerability does not mean weakness. Vulnerability takes a lot of strength. It means you have the strength to be able to be vulnerable to things and allow yourself to feel things. And choices need consequences. And remember that I said that consequences are cause and effect is not a very easy thing for adoptees to know because of the early things that happened in your life. So you have to be very careful. When you make a choice, you have to think, what are the consequences of my choice going to be? And remember that no choice is a choice. If you just can't decide things, well, that's a choice too. Because you need to make choices if you want to have some kind of control over your life. Then I want you to question the old, false, obsolete beliefs that you may still have about yourself that was stuck in your neurological system since you were born because your mother wasn't there. And your mother not being there and your mother not being able to hear you when you were crying. That's also what made you think you didn't have any impact on anybody. That really sunk in deep. So anyway, okay, I'll take questions. Let me see if I can get,